Do you want to back up your Kubernetes applications that you're deploying for your customers? In this video, we will talk about the ways how you can back up your business applications, your customers' applications that you're hosting in the Kubernetes using Velero, and what are the other options to do that. With me, I have my special guest, my good colleague, Kamil Rithaler. Kamil, maybe you will introduce yourself, who you are, and how you can help us in discussion about Kubernetes and in general custom development in the cloud.
Hi Shmuel, hi all, thank you for having me. So I'm Kamil Rithaler and I'm Microsoft 365 Azure Solution Architect, and I'm helping on clients to build solutions on top of Microsoft 365 and Power Platform components, Azure components, etc. So in general, in Microsoft world.
Perfect. Great to have you on this video, because I personally, I'm totally not a developer. I have an understanding of the Kubernetes, but I never wrote proper line of code around developing. So that's why we have the expert with us to help us to go through that. And first of all, what we want to think about, so why at all we talking about Kubernetes in the area of the modern custom development? Why nowadays developers using that platform? So nowadays we're moving to the Kubernetes to develop the applications, mostly because the possibility to use the scalable modern approach for the microservices based applications. And what are the benefits behind that? Maybe Kamil, you can tell me more about it.
In modern development, we get many platforms, many components, and we try to utilize as most of common services in our apps as we can. So when you are tied up to one of your cloud provider of your choice, for example Azure, then you're used to use all of the services from Azure. But maybe there's some service that it's available on other platforms, or maybe it comes from repositories like image with service that provides role-based authentication to your application. And you never know where you will be deploying your app. Probably you should choose Kubernetes, as you can create your app with all of the containers that will be running inside the solution. And then you can deploy it to any of the available platforms.
So I can also imagine that if we will extend that kind of custom application, or the data will grow up, it will be much easier to scale up that kind of app. Moreover, we will not be limited only to one technology, one hosting platform. We can easily scale up that kind of applications.
Yes, exactly. And there is many open source containers images that you can use in your apps. This is a big advantage of hosting your apps in Kubernetes: scalability, maintainability, and portability.
So I can also imagine if we're building something super simple, Kubernetes will not be maybe the first choice for us, but if we're looking for the possibly huge application, that's our direction. So
yeah, exactly.
In that case, if we're expecting to have very complex, scalable applications, possibly with the huge volume of the data, maybe huge traffic, one of the components that most of the developers will look for is also possibility to do the backup. So moreover, if we will make the disaster recovery scenario, or we will make a mistake during the deployment and we will need to roll back to the previous version, we need to have the, let's say, opportunity to do that using some kind of backup solution.
Yeah, exactly. So Kubernetes is very complex system that provides many tools and utilities. So even if you're building a simple app, which probably you shouldn't do in Kubernetes, it will be many components to take care of.
DevOps team is probably needed to handle that. Perfect. So in this video, what we want to focus on, so if we will build that kind of app, how we can back up that kind of application, the components around it, that container that we will build. Moreover, what are the possible options, what are the risks behind it, pros and cons, and what you can do. And we will also present how to use Velero solution, which is free, that gives that possibility, but also requires some kind of DevOps capabilities on your side to do that. But it's possible to be done. So now we will switch for a moment for our partner that's helping us to provide this video, and in the moment we will get back to you. AFI.AI is a proud partner of the video. The company supports us to provide you the knowledge about the backup of the Kubernetes platform. If you're looking for the fully manageable service around backup of the Kubernetes that will work on autopilot, this is something that you should check. So if you will think about backup of your Kubernetes applications, one thing which you will need to think about what possible options that you have. So at first you can do no backup at all, but you know the saying, the backups are not made only by people that never have to restore the data. So this is not something that we're recommending, especially if we're talking about complex applications with multiple layers, multiple components around it. The second option is possibility if you will deliver the server-based hosting platform for your Kubernetes to back up the machines that hosting the Kubernetes. And this is something that is possible, but first of all, you need to be on premise or hosting virtual machines on the cloud. And second, you need to consider the time necessary to back up and then restore. It's not something that you can constantly deliver. It's not something that you can very quickly execute and then restore. Moreover, if you will start to use components in other maybe cloud-based solutions, this will start to be more and more complicated, especially to limit the time necessary for the restoring time. Other options, if you will have something hosted in the cloud, what kind of options do you have there?
In the cloud, if you're using cloud provider Kubernetes solutions like AKS from Azure, for example, then the most important thing that you're backupping, of course, is your app, so app schema. So in general, you should have your infrastructure as a code in general. So you're just deploying all of the components from the code, not just clicking in the UI or typing all of the commands manually. So it's the first thing. And the second thing are persistent volumes. And each cloud provider has different persistent volume underlying technology. So in Azure, there are three possibilities: Azure Files, Azure Disk, and Azure NetApp Files, I think. And each of these possibility has own backup features. So this is the second approach that you can take.
So it still is possible, but then you need to handle the backup of the specific components. And if you will need to restore, the same thing. You need to go through the process, probably build some kind of documentation, in what order, what kind of commands have to be used to make it happen. Okay, perfect. And the last option that we will focus today on is a possibility to back up your Kubernetes, your schema, your data, all the configuration that is needed to do the restore of your application based on Velero application. And this is the platform that is free, is provided by community. You can configure and install it on your environment and then start to back up and restore your application if this will be needed. First of all, there's no additional cost behind it, but also you need to take into consideration that this is the application supported by the community, so there's no, let's say, professional support if this will be needed. Moreover, very similar to previous solutions, you will need to have some kind of DevOps team to help you to, or you need to have DevOps skills to do that. So to configure, to deploy it, then to monitor the process to be sure that the backup is correctly done, that all the data is there. But it is fully possible. And today, in today's video, we will show you how to configure that kind of backup, what things you need to also take into consideration. You will see it's not super difficult, but at the same time, it's not that easy that, me personally, I will not be able to do that. So that's why I bring the expert in the area of custom development and cloud platforms to be sure that that will be the person that will help us to go through that process. And the last possible scenario that could be also taken into consideration in such a case is the, let's say, Kubernetes managed service backup. Yeah? So the solution that you install, integrate with your platform, which handles the backup and then the restore process. But we will focus on the Veliro application, how you can deploy. So now we will switch to Kamil's screen. He will show us, based on his environment, how that kind of configuration, deployment, and setup could looks like, how the backup and the restore will work. In the description of the video, you will find also references to the documentation and possible comments that need to be used. Feel free to follow our guideline and do the same configuration on your Kubernetes environment.
What we see here is Veliro website. Veliro is an open source Kubernetes backup solution, and it consists of two components. The first one is server containers, which are installed inside Kubernetes cluster, has its own namespace. And the second part is CLI. So CLI is command line interface, which allows to communicate with components installed on Kubernetes cluster. I need to start with installing Veliro CLI. So my home server is Ubuntu server. So I need to download the release for Linux AMD 64.
So my understanding is also that after we will configure the Veliro and these two components, we need to also provide the storage for the data where we will host our backup.
Actually, you need to do that first before installing Veliro on your Kubernetes cluster. So the options are, for now, only block storages. Amazon S3, Mini IO, Google Bucket, Azure Blob Storage, and those are storage backup locations provided by Veliro. Rest of the providers are provided by community, so maybe there is a backup storage provider for your storage option. In our case, we'll be using Azure Blob Storage. There you get the documentation how to install CLI depending on the operating system of your choice. Then when you install the CLI, you can start installing the Veliro on your Kubernetes cluster. Let's install Veliro on my home server. What I need: name of the blob container in my blob storage. Also, I need a name for my Azure resource group. Then the name of my storage account, subscription ID, and storage account access key. In general, on production, you should use service principal, but for a demo purpose, storage account key should be okay. So we got all of the parameters for our Veliro installment. Go to Veliro GitHub page, choose the right backup provider, and there will be command that you need to run.
And also you will find direction to get that directly in the description of the video.
Okay. And that's it. Veliro CLI installed all of the Veliro resources, so it created its own Kubernetes namespace, and all of the components, containers that will do backups for us.
So my understanding nowadays we can use the command line to configure our backup.
Yes, exactly. As I said earlier, we have client and server. So right now I'm using my CLI, which I used to install the Veliro on a cluster, and I can do a backup. So there are two types of backup. The first one is a regular on-demand backup and scheduled backup. So the backup that will create at that specified time.
And probably the second option will be something that most of the owners of the app will look for, to have the regular schedule to back up your data. So as soon as you have the CLI configured, you have your block storage that will allow you to host your data. So now we will try to configure that kind of backup and show you how to do that.
Yes, exactly. Let's assume that you have Postgres database in your cluster can't just backup it. You need to run some script that will dump database, and then another script that will run during restore that will read data from the dump, not just from the disk. Because as we know, when there's a stateful application, something is going on the server during backup, then you might end up in a state that you cannot restore your backup.
And these are some kind of additional activities that you should also take into consideration. That's why we mentioned this DevOps operations
Yes, exactly.
needed, that if you want to configure backup of the complex application, Veliro will help you to do that, but you will need to a little extend it with your additional activities.
Yes, exactly. So Veliro will not recognize type of container that you run. So it doesn't know that it should run some script or have a repository of script to freeze some application during backup time. So there's a backup hooks and restore hooks. So this is just Kubernetes annotation that you are specifying on the deployment, and then you providing script that will be run on backup and restore.
This is also quite important because this will freeze your application for some time. And you need
Yes.
to also planning that kind of backup. You need to take that into consideration to do that after, let's say, working hours or at the most suitable time. And also we highly recommend to test how much time it will take. Probably will not be the hours, but still measure that because this is important factor.
Okay, so let's create on-demand Veliro backup. Veliro backup create, and we are not now providing the name for the backup. So my first backup, and here we also got some naming convention. Okay, and our backup submitted successfully. So basically, it just backup the whole cluster. Let's copy the command that Sila is proposing. So Veliro backup describe my first backup, and we'll have more information about our backup. So it's a name, namespace, label, it's completed. We see that everything was backed up.
So my understanding is that everything was backupped. It
Yes.
is on our block storage, but this is something that we need to execute manually.
Yes, exactly. It was on demand. We can think of that backup when you will be doing something with your cluster. I don't know, maybe moving thing, adding resources. Then you probably need a manual backup, but you will be using scheduled backup more often. So we can create a very simple scheduled backup, and here you providing cron expression. So cron expression is its definition of the time of the interval that the backup will be executed, and we'll use something like daily. So we'll have daily backup. Okay, and it's scheduled.
But my understanding is that after we will execute that kind of backup, our copy of backup of our data will land on the block storage. But this data is also not encrypted, yeah? So somebody could access that data. Is it secure?
At the time we are recording this video, Veliro uses their own encryption key, but it's common key for all Veliro deployments. If someone gets access to backup storage, then can easily decrypt the data. So it's encrypted, but it uses common key. And bringing your own key is on their roadmap.
But we can extend that kind of capabilities using some kind of additional scripting on the DevOps level to encrypt the data and decrypt the data before the restore. These are some limitations that are there. You can, let's say, extend them by your additional development, additional DevOps work, and it also elements worth to consider, especially if you have enterprise level solutions that you want to backup. And now we will switch to the screen of the Azure storage to see how our backup looks like there.
We are in Veliro blob container that I choose for my backup location, and we can check how our backup looks like. We have our demo backup, and we can see that Veliro created many tarballs. So tarball is an archive of different Kubernetes components.
So you can see all the data is there, so it's not like, just successful message on the command line. It's really working. And as soon as you will back up your data, it will be saved on your storage. So you need to also take into consideration how long do you want to store the data there, how to retain it, and elements and possible costs behind it. But again, it's not the rocket science to handle that. We'll also get back for a moment to this Valero to show you command line which is required to restore the data.
Now we back up our data, but how to restore it? To restore it, you need to create a restore. So it's very similar to creating a backup. Valero, create, restore. Now we are providing restore name, my first restore, and we need to provide a backup or schedule. It will be from backup. Okay.
And job is created. And you can see again, if you will follow the documentation and the Valero site or in the command line itself, you can create that kind of configuration of the backup and restore process of your Kubernetes. Remember, there are a few elements that you need to take into consideration. So first of all, you need to have additional storage, block storage that will contain your backup. If you want to secure that backup, you need to also take into consideration of the encryption of that data. Plus, if you would take schedule time, large application, you will also need to handle some components that will require a freeze to be sure that the restore process will be working properly. And as we mentioning always, after you will create that kind of backup, create the test environment and try to restore it to be sure that it's working, because having the backup, there's no value behind it if you cannot restore it at all. We hope that this video helped you to prepare yourself to do the backup of your Kubernetes applications. As you can see, Valero could address it. You can also use other alternative solutions like AFI.AI, but what is most important, you can choose whatever works for you. So Kamil, thank you very much for joining me today. I'm quite sure that I will not be able to do that without you. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much again, and thank you for having me. And
Perfect.
see you in the next video.
Yeah, see you in the next video. Thank you very much for watching.